Mario Kart 64 has one of the most active speedrunning scenes to date, with competitive history dating all the way back to the game's release. It's no surprise that some records would weather the storm and stand for years. But how long would they stand? And are any still standing? That's what we're looking at today, the longest standing records in Mario Kart 64 history. There are two types of records when it comes to Mario Kart 64, free laps and fast laps, which are separated further by non-skips and skips that allow tricks and glitches. Today we're looking at records from skips and non-skips, which includes currently active records and records that stood for years to be beaten in fantastic fashion. One more thing, if a runner sets a record and then lowers it, that will be counted in the duration of them holding the record. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at our first record. The first record we're looking at was set in 2003 by Michael Jongrius, the Luigi Raceway non-shortcut fast lap. This was from a time well before video streaming, before YouTube, and just 2 months after MySpace went live, so there isn't any footage to see. The previous record, set by Troy Ullman, was preserved on a VHS tape he recorded and later uploaded to YouTube. Troy drove a time of 31:37 to beat MJ's previous record by just 1/100th of a second. If you know anything about Mario Kart 64 history, you know that MJ was the longest reigning champion in history, and he didn't let this stand for long. He wouldn't mail in a VHS tape, or even post on the forum. All he sent was a single email just 9 days later, with an update that he'd reclaimed the record with a 31:35. The years would roll by, and nobody would challenge MJ's time, until 8 years later in 2011, when the current champ star was rising. Matthias would take MJ's record by 3/100ths of a second, dethroning a time that was the longest current record in 2011, standing for just under 8 years, or 2,842 days. Clocking in at just over 8 years, the second record we're looking at is the Mario Raceway Shortcut F-Lap, set by Gutierrez. Mario Raceway is known for being one of the hardest tracks to play at the competitive level due to its short length and level of optimization in all categories, and the Skips F-Lap is no exception. There is a well-known skip on this track that can be done with red shells or a mushroom that involves launching your cart over a wall with shells, or jumping off a piece of track with a mushroom to skip over the wall and complete the lap. This is time trials, so you have 3 mushrooms available to you, and since you only need 1 for the jump, the other 2 are used to cut time off of corners to speed up the lap, giving you a total of 4 boosts if you count the 1 when the race starts. When Steven attempted this, he was battling with MJ, trying to stop the Dutch Dominator from claiming all of the records, and he'd succeed, besting MJ's time by 7/100ths of a second on August 9th, 2004, which would stand for 2,946 days before Zoran would best him 8 years later. The Koopa Troopa Beach Fast Lap record that MJ set on September 6, 2004 is one of the longest standing records in Mario Kart 64 history. The tight corners on the track have hard surfaces around them, so if you stray from the correct line in the slightest, you don't just lose a bit of speed, but crash into a wall and kill your run. When MJ set this record, he beat the previous one held by Troy Ullman by 9/100ths of a second to set the first sub-31 second time. This stood unchallenged for 3,042 days until Matthias tied it, but it wouldn't take another 8 years to break it, because 4 days after Matthias's tie, BAJ would break it in fantastic fashion. The next record is our first to get close to the 10-year mark, and it's the Royal Raceway 3-lap record. I'm taking a slight liberty with this record because it was set and then lowered by the same person while his reign was uninterrupted. Royal Raceway is a long track with many twists and turns that you need to cut close consistently, but it's not the mushroom section that gives players the most difficulty. The section after the big jump is the largest run killer on this course, where players are forced to drive over a patch of grass at a specific angle. If you spend too long navigating this section, your cart will lose enough speed that the run is effectively dead, And since this is a 3-lap, you need to do this 3 times with absolute perfection, or you'll be hitting the reset button. Troy would set his record in September of 2003, and then just 11 months later, he would lower it again to a time of 2:52.29, improving his previous time by 900ths of a second. Counting the total time he held this record from when he first set it, Troy Ullman would be the master of Royal Raceway for 3,370 days, just over 9 years. It would stand for 4 years before MJ would start doing attempts to lower the time, but he couldn't get the job done, only managing to tie the record in 2008, so it still stood unbroken. Fast forward 4 more years, and Matthias Roostermeier would start on the track in his effort to overtake MJ and claim the crown of champion, but even he couldn't conquer the time on his first attempt, tying the record just as MJ did. It would only take Matthias another day before he broke the tie, ending Troy's reign as the master of Royal Raceway, besting it by 200ths of a second. And in the ensuing years, the record would see massive improvements at the hands of Matthias and Daniel Burbank, the 2 greatest time trial players in all of history. The Yoshi Valley shortcut F-lap may be the most interesting record with the longest standing unbroken streak. It wouldn't take long after the game's release before David Wan, an early runner and glitch hunter, would discover that you could abuse Lakitu on this track by going out of bounds at certain locations. He quickly spread this around an early player's email list and submitted it to magazines for publication, where it would gain notoriety. From here, the record started flooding in, with this skip being used by many of the early greats to grab mid-35-second times. Between 1999 and mid-2010, the record would only be lowered 8 times, getting grinded down to a 33.43. This would come to a halt when Alex Greising picked up his controller. In November of 2010, he'd start doing attempts, and he would tie the record of 43.43 set by Carlo Tomazelli on the 4th. And just 23 days later, he'd break the tie with a 33.39. In the next 10 years, many people would attempt to break this record, and none would succeed. But 3 people would come close. Greg Inatenko, VAJ, and Abney would all tie this record, but none were able to break it. The reason for this is that the 3-lap is very precise, and the setup takes place at the start line. By using a mushroom boost and pulling hard left, you just need to jump over the fence. Since this record doesn't involve much driving or angling, it was very quick to get optimized, which led to its current situation. As it stands, there are only a few precious hundredths of a second to come off of this record, which means it may well grow to be the longest record ever held in Mario Kart 64 history, setting at 3,572 days currently. Donkey Kong Jungle Parkway is tied with Moo Moo Farm for being one of the hardest tracks for more than one reason. First, it has a ramp jump that requires a near perfect angle to pull off correctly, and if that's not bad enough, it leads directly into 2 grassy corners that you need to cut across to save time, except this track has coconuts that come out of the jungle to whack you. Getting the lowest amount of coconuts is hard enough, but there's also a difficult hill climb at the end of the lap, and with so much that can go wrong, 1 lap is hard enough, let alone 3. That being said, the DKJP non-shortcut 3-lap record is the longest unbroken record in Mario Kart 64 history, held almost exclusively by William Lacey. While his reign would be interrupted from time to time, his longest stretch of unbroken claims run from early 2003 all the way to mid-2014, for a grand total of 4,145 days. If you count all of Lacey's times holding the record from 2000 until 2003, and then on and off holdings from 2014 until 2018, he held the record for a total of 5,531 days, or just over 15 years. At the time of his final record holding in 2018, the game had been out for 22 years, which means that Lacey held the record for all but 7 of those. While he may not be the overall champion, when it comes to DKJP, he is indeed a legend. And legends never die. Thanks for watching.